In this video, January Littlejohn tells a story of how her school transitioned her daughter without even telling her. Take a look at this video.
First and foremost, it is just an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you. It's so funny to hear people come up to me and say, "Oh, you're the Twitter girl with the sign." And I'm like, yeah, but there's a story. I can't wait for you to hear it. So maybe this will give you some feedback and background onto why I hold that sign every day. So in the spring of 2020, at the height of COVID, our 13-year-old daughter came to us and told us she no longer felt like a girl. She had no previous signs of confusion in early childhood. So how did we get here? Our daughter, like so many of these other girls, was very vulnerable to this ideology for many reasons. First, she has ADHD and she's gifted. So for many of these girls, that reads like autism until their emotional intelligence catches up to their IQ. Jessie Ministo, who you just saw on the panel from Third Factor, talks about gifted girls feeling like an outlier. They sometimes can be overly sensitive, overfeel emotions, and can be seen as just too much at times. And that perfectly described our daughter. Jessie also uses the analogy dandelions versus orchids. So if you don't know what she's referring to, please look that up because our daughter is definitely a very rare exotic orchid. Our daughter tended to perseverate on issues, sometimes for years, and she still does. And at the time, she was a very black and white thinker. She's an artist, musician, and into theater, like so many of these girls, which led her to websites like Scratch and DeviantArt, which is rampant with this ideology. She was also being influenced by book series, especially anime, and even music. Her favorite band at the time was Cavetown, which is a trans-identified singer. Lastly, and most importantly, she was a part of an in-person friend group at her middle school who was obsessed with LGBTQ identities. And for my daughter, who was desperately searching for a place to fit in and belong, having a friend group indoctrinate her into these identities, but also have these makeshift identities ready for you with colorful flags and pronouns. It was very enticing to her because it gave her a sense of belonging and who she was. Everything surrounded around these flags and identities. That was the first question they would ask other peers that they came in contact with. What is your flag? What are your colors? What are your pronouns? 3 of her in-person friends, by the time our daughter announced her transgender identity, had also announced transgender identities. And as you all know, it no longer just means that you're identifying as the opposite sex. It can be non-binary, gender fluid, demi-girl, demi-boy. If you Google, I think there are now an infinite number of gender identities. So in our initial research, I am a licensed mental health counselor, and I was struck by how my training back in the late 90s and early 2000s was not a reflection of what I was seeing in my daughter's friend group. And I predominantly worked with adolescents and college-age students, and I did not have one client that was experiencing confusion over their sex. When I was trained in my graduate program, we were not even using the terms non-binary, gender fluid. It was non-existent. And all of the resources pointed to only affirming these identities. I could not find an alternate treatment option, which struck me as very odd because part of my job as a therapist is to do differential diagnosis. And it did not seem like that was happening. The other thing that I observed right away is much of the coping mechanisms my daughter was using mimicked anorexic girls and what they would do. And so just like anorexia and eating disorders, how that is the tip of the iceberg, and everything under the surface is really what leads to that diagnosis and that behavior, I really saw gender dysphoria is no different. So I was really confused as to why I was not finding an array of treatment options. And intuitively, we did not feel affirming this false identity that came along so suddenly was the right choice for our daughter. We also realized that she was simply confused. The more we talked to her, the more we realized there was no substance. She did not understand the things that she was asking for, like HRT, puberty blockers, top surgery, which of course they rebranded as a double mastectomy. And she couldn't answer basic questions like, well, what do you mean you don't feel like a girl? What does it mean to feel like a boy or a girl? She couldn't answer any of these with real depth or knowledge of the topic. We went into the summer and things were getting worse, not better. My husband and I were really struggling to figure out how to best help her. So we elicited the help of a mental health counselor. And as school was approaching, I reached out to the school as I had done so many times before. I am a stay-at-home mom, and so the vast majority of my time was spent volunteering in my children's schools. I was even volunteer of the year at this middle school. So I had no reason not to trust the school had my daughter's best interest. I was also a substitute teacher, just to give you an indication of how involved I was in my kids' schooling. So I reached out to her homeroom teacher, and I let her know that my daughter may ask to be called by a different name. This is what's going on. We're doing our best to navigate this with a therapist within our home. We are not affirming this identity. In fact, I feel it's directly related to her friend group. And there are details about that communication that I can't go into because we are still in litigation with the school district. But the teacher I confided in was the LGBTQ advocate on campus. So I didn't hear anything further from the teacher. I had assumed, as I reached out to her, that it would be treated like a nickname. A couple of weeks later, my daughter got into the car and said, "Mom, I had a meeting at school today about my name." But it was weird because they asked me which restroom I wanted to use. My daughter was identifying as non-binary at that time. But again, she was confused. Her identity changed 4 times over 2 years, just to give you an indication. As she told me this, I was shocked. As I stated previously, my daughter has diagnosed ADHD, so she has a 504 plan. And I know that they cannot implement a 504 plan without me being present and signing forms. So I was very confused and shocked how they had had a meeting with my daughter that I didn't know about, and I wasn't invited to or anything like that. So I immediately emailed the school counselor, and she called me back with the assistant principal. So immediately I knew something was off. And they said, "Mrs. Littlejohn, we cannot give you any information about the meeting we had with your child. They are now protected by a non-discrimination law. Your only recourse is to go to the assistant superintendent," which I did. And phone calls and emails went back and forth for multiple weeks, and we were finally given an in-person meeting with the principal of the middle school. By this time, the first 9 weeks had just ended, to give you an indication of how long this took. So at this meeting, we were shown the gender support plan. And I know one of the presenters yesterday had one of these plans. This is from Gender Spectrum. I wish I could show you my daughter's support plan, but because we are in litigation, that is part of the evidence, because it would show you just how childlike her answers were and how the power differential must have been in that room with 3 adults consisting of an assistant principal, a school counselor, and a social worker I had never met, with my 13-year-old child behind closed doors filling out a 6-page transgender support plan. My daughter, because she has ADHD, was emotionally 11 at that time. So as you see from this intake form, the process was you go to the school counselor, you say, "I'm trans," and within 48 hours, they are required to set up a meeting. And I have circled the part where it says parent or guardian. Are they aware and are they supportive? So this was the only question where they asked her, and that ultimately decided whether or not my husband and I would be notified or asked to come to the meeting. So at this meeting that they had with my child, this is the first page of the support plan. And as you see the word supportive again. And this word supportive, like so much of our language, has been hijacked by activism. It no longer means the same thing to everyone. So for instance, supporting a child in the reality of her natal body does not count as support to trans activists. The considerations portion of the plan is where they ask the child, would you like privacy from your parents? Meaning, when we speak to your parents, should we refer to you as your birth name and pronouns, or should we use your preferred name and pronouns? And this is to effectively deceive parents from knowing that these support plans and these social transitions have ever even occurred. So again, you see the plan colludes with the child to reiterate who can and cannot be aware of the child's confusion. This is an enormous amount of power they are giving to young children that are not equipped to handle it. This also really pits the child against her parents and sends a clear message that the parent authority is no longer wanted or needed. It also sent the message to our daughter that she needed to be protected from us and not by us. This is the page where I almost came out of my chair during the meeting. This is where they asked the children which restrooms and showers they would like to use on campus and which sex they prefer to room with on overnight field trips. And all this is done under the guise of making a child feel safe at school. But if you really cared about the safety of a child, parents would immediately be included in these meetings every single time. Further, there was not one question on this plan about previous history of self-harm or suicidal ideation or potential abuse at home. Yet these are the exact reasons being constantly used to cut parents out of these critical decisions being made. This was never about the safety of these children. This plan created a huge wedge between us and our daughter, and shortly after this, her mental health spiraled. So after the meeting, I was very angry, and we continued throughout this process to ask for legal justification that they had for meeting with our child without our notification or consent. And we were finally mailed this 28-page guide, the Leon County Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, Gender Nonconforming, and Questioning Support Guide. I've also included an Equality Florida Safe Space sticker that you can see all over Leon County schools, even in the elementary schools. As part of this guide, there was a Q&A. And this is part of the Q&A. So it says misgendering is considered harassment. So student harassment is a firing offense for teachers and staff. This sent a clear message: comply or lose your job. A student has exhibited behavior in school leading administrators or teachers to believe the student is LGBTQ+. Should the parents or guardians be notified? No. Outing a student, especially to parents, can be dangerous to the student's health and well-being. Outing students to their parents can literally make them homeless. So parents who love their children more than anyone else, who are ultimately responsible for every part of their care, are being painted as enemies to their own children with no due process.
So this video tells us a lot. January Littlejohn, this mother here, is passionately pouring out her heart on how her school transitioned her daughter. Let me say that again. The school transitioned her daughter. Now, there are many things that we can pull from this video. Number one, she was transitioned by books. I am known throughout this country as the book banning pastor. And I am not a book banner. Would y'all stop calling me that word? You know, you make me want to cry when you say it. I am not a book banner. I am saying that in the same manner that we put safeguards on the internet where kids can't go to their favorite sites, that we should do the same thing with the library. We shouldn't put books in the library that rival books like Playboy magazine and Hugh Hefner and Swank, you know? That shouldn't take place. But the books that she was being transitioned by was like these anime books. So we have to be mindful of that as well, parents. Number one, she was being transitioned by books. Number two, by friend groups that confused her. You know, some of these groups are at these public schools and they are supposed to be support groups. And hear me, all support isn't good support. Just because someone says, I support you, that doesn't mean that they are promoting you towards something that is good. All support is not created equal. Number three, when she was at school, they were asking her questions like, what's your flag? What are your colors? What are your pronouns? None of your business. My flag is the American flag or the Christian flag or the state flag. My colors are crimson and white, the blood of Jesus, and that white garment that we're going to receive in heaven one day. And my pronouns are simple. You can see that I'm a M-A-N. A man. And then also they talked about differential diagnosis and coping mechanisms that mimicked anorexia. And they asked her, the daughter was asking questions about surgeries and certain things that she didn't even know what these terms meant, but she was being told these things by her friend groups. And then the school asked her what restroom that she wanted to use. This is otherworldly. It's demonic. And then when you talk about that demonic support plan, where it says, are guardians of the student aware and supportive of their child's gender transition? Yes or no? If not, what considerations must be accounted for in implementing this plan? So, are the parents on board with what is taking place with their child? Parents should be made aware, and parents have the right to not be on board and not have the school be the mediator between whether they think this is necessary or unnecessary. This is what the Bible says. Proverbs 22, verse 6 says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Hear me. We are called to train our children up, not to mess them up. And we should not surrender our children to these godless institutions who want to mess our children up. So parents, you have a job. You are the first pedagogue for your child. You are supposed to be the main catechizer, the main trainer, the main developer for your child. Not the state, not the government, not these woke leftists who, you know, are suffering from the lack of oxygen get into their brain, and they come up with all of these nefarious plans to mess up our kids. Train them up, but don't mess them up. I hope and pray that you were blessed by this video. Stick around for more content. Like, share, and subscribe to my page. God bless you.